witch may we burn, huh?
Hello, welcome to the Broken Meeple, a show devoted to board game reviews. I'm Luke Hector, and this is Septima Deluxe Edition from Mindclash Games. So Mindclash Games, if you know anything about them, they are known for making super heavy, complex, brain-burning, insane games of Euros. Not getting into GMT and war games and things like that. You don't go to Mindclash when you want the nice, family-friendly game to show your gamer spouse. It doesn't really happen. So they have their niche, they're used to making this kind of thing, and for the most part they've done pretty well at it. I love Jacarion, I love Anachrony, I really like Cerebria, but then I didn't get on too well with Perseverance, and Voidfall, as much as it's okay to play solo, is way too big, complex, and like just too much faff to make it a worthwhile game, and it's getting to the point of being overrated. So, you know, they are hit and miss, but for the most part they tend to make pretty good hits. Now, they have started to make lighter fare, so we've got Septima here, which is meant to be their kind of midweight entry into their lineup, and they also did another lighter game called Astra. Less said about that the better. But this one was basically done on Kickstarter. I paid the whole lot, so this is not a review copy, this is my own copy that I backed, got it in September, and I've only had a chance to play it now, because of Essen and all the other stuff I've had to do. So this has sat around on my shelf for shame for a long time.
I'm sorry, man.
And finally, I wanted to get it played, give it the beans, and give my thoughts on it. You know, was it a worthy Kickstarter purchase? So, as I said, this is their medium game that they're bringing out. It's supposed to be quicker to play, easier to learn, not as complex as their other fare, but this is Mindclash Games after all, and we know what they've made before, so can they pull it off? Can they do a midweight game? And if they do, is it still fun to play? Well, that's my job to tell you about it.
Does anyone want to get out?
For the purposes of this overview, I'm not going to talk about the mini expansions, and I'm going to talk about this as if you're playing the full game, because frankly, the basic game just really isn't worth it after you've tried it maybe once to learn the rules.
You can't do that! You can't do that!
You are the leader of a powerful witch coven striving to gain the most wisdom over the 4 seasons of the game in order to become the new Septima. You will, among other things, brew potions, heal patients, perform rituals to collect powerful spells, and complete the tasks in your book of divinations to achieve this goal. The main mechanic of the game revolves around 9 action cards. Every player has the same and each one performs a different action. Simultaneously, you will put one down and reveal it to see what action you're doing in the turn. But you can freely discuss what it is you're going to do because each card has a matching bonus. If you play the same action as another player, you both get the bonus at the bottom of the card on top of what the ability already is. Sounds great. Problem is, it raises your suspicion, which is a track on your board, which is something that you need to micromanage during the game. Too much suspicion has the witch hunters coming in your general direction, and also means that witches that go on trial have less likelihood to be exiled. Yeah, we'll get on that a bit later. But the idea with these cards is that you have to kind of decide what actions you're going to do for a round. You only get to play 5 out of the 9 in a round. They are one use only, and you have to sort of decide whether you want to like match with another player or not. You could instead match with the Septima, but in doing so, your suspicion is going to go up even higher. So do you want to? Do you not? You have to make that decision. Once you have resolved your action with the card, the witch hunters can then start coming after you. Depending on your suspicion level, they will basically move across the map to hunt down a particular witch. It's based on a die roll plus your suspicion rating, and if they happen to catch you, then one of your witches ends up going on trial. You might lose some points. Generally, it's a bit of a negative.
I got better.
The game goes on for 4 seasons, of which there are 5 rounds where you are playing a card and resolving the actions. Once these 5 rounds are done, at the end of a season there is a trial. The trial works on a pull out of the bag majority mechanic. So depending on how many citizens every player has committed to the crowd, as it's called, these will get added to the bag along with a bunch of angry citizens, red meeples, which are based on everybody's suspicion rating. The more suspicion that there is, the more riled up that the people get. And what will happen is that so many will get drawn out of the bag, and it's essentially a majority game. So all these will go down on the board. You can't see the board here, but you'll see in the pictures. And so the Meeples have to outnumber the angry citizens, so your Meeples versus theirs. If you do so, then whoever put the most Meeples out will get the witch and add it to their coven. Each of these witches essentially gives you a really cool special power that you have for the whole game that affects certain actions that you do. The different potions that you can create range from the different remedies that you'll use to heal patients, which effectively level you up on tracks and get you bonuses and points, but there's a few little weird practical ones that you can make that can lower your suspicion rating, put more people into the crowd, allow you to fly across the board. You know, they do all sorts of weird little abilities that you would expect from magic potions. On top of that, you also have a ritual track, which the ritual track in the full game is essentially an alternate means of you to get some victory points, but also to gain spell cards. These spell cards come in 3 different color categories based on where you are on the board, and with these spells, they're essentially tap, exhaust, and use the ability until you get a chance to ready the spell. They have a few different effects, some ongoing, some instant, but some of them are tied to specific actions, and of course, grabbing a few spells is not a bad way to get some cool powers for the game. And at the end of the game, when you are scoring up from your patient tracks and your various leftover resources and the points you've earned during the game, you have to consult your Book of Divinations. It is a 4-part objective card where, based on the witches that you have, one witch allows you to fulfill one objective on here. And these are things like collect so many of an ingredient, have so many people in the crowd, have so much suspicion, you know, that kind of thing. And essentially for each witch you are allowed to fulfill one condition on this card. Hopefully you can fulfill at least 3 of these conditions by the end of the game, because if you don't, chances are you ain't gonna win. But if you can do all 4, then kudos to you. And of course, once you've totaled up all the victory points, have a guess.
Of course!
Components-wise, bear in mind this is the deluxe edition of the game, so you are paying a price to get these upgraded components, but they're pretty decent for the most part. I mean, you have got screen-printed Meeples for your leader and the various witch hunters. You've got game trays, which I know they've had some weird designs in the past, but here, for the most part, we'll get on to that, the elephant in the room. You have some decent trays for use of player pieces and your resources, all of which are screen-printed wooden pieces. You know, they are pretty good. The cards, they are, you know, a soft linen finish. You probably are going to want to sleeve these, but they are still pretty decent. I like it when they're tarot size as well, because it makes them nice and big. The artwork in general is a little busy on the board, but it's generally decent artwork, and it fits the theme of the Septima theme that it's going for. But there is a caveat with all this. As I said, you're paying a lot of money for this. It's not a cheap game. It's certainly not the smallest box in the world. I mean, I've seen bigger for Minecraft, but still. But they did fluff up on one aspect. This tray, this is not in the retail version, this is in the deluxe version. This tray is, in no other word, garbage.
Oh, yes! I hate this!
Absolute garbage. This is the potion tray. It is already too big for what it needs to be. It has all the details of how you make each potion and what they do in iconography on here, but then you have a reference card that tells you this already in front of you, so why do I need it printed on this board? But that's not the worst thing. You want to try and get pieces out of this thing? Oh boy, you could have fun with this. You have the potions in here, and the top 2 or 3 are easy to get out of. You poke the top, like the lid, one will pop out and you can take it out. Okay, let's do the second one. There we go. Third one. Fourth one. Fourth one. Fourth. It is a nightmare trying to get them out of there. You can't push the thing down enough to get the thing to poke out of its cubbyhole. So unless you have got the smallest fingers or the longest, sharpest of fingernails, like to the point where you actually look like Deathstrike or whatever she is from like the X-Men series, then you're going to struggle to get the stuff out of here. Just forget this tray and stack them on the board. It is so much easier. Now this is meant to be a medium weight game, and it sort of is, but we are still on the heavy side of medium. I would not call this medium in the sense that I would call a Garfield game medium. This is still on the heavy end of gaming, it's just on the lighter end of a Minecraft game, which, let's face it, that's a pretty high benchmark to go against in terms of complexity. But gotta give props, this rulebook is really, really good. You know, there's a lot of pictorial examples where you need it. There's enough text without it being just a wall of text. But it's written pretty clearly as well. I actually found this to be a relatively straightforward book to learn the rules just from reading the book. But you don't need to watch a video. Don't worry about watching a video. You'll learn it fine from this book, honestly. I certainly did. Now, it's not perfect by any means. There's one or two bits that are a little bit hard to reference. There's a few edge cases in the game which, you know, oh great, how does that edge case work? Oh, I gotta go find it. But referencing is also a little bit of a problem because they do give you a cool reference card for the season sequence, but it doesn't explain everything. And they do give you a very handy potion chart. That's probably the best thing in here. What it doesn't tell you is a lot of the iconography. You have to get the back of the rule book for that, which is always a pain, so passing the book around. But the other thing is that for some strange reason, they don't give you a reference card for the witches. There's a lot of witches in this game. They are all unique, and the iconography is not the most intuitive in this game, I have to say. You know, so you've got all these witches with different abilities, and there's no reference for them. You have to go into the back of the rule book. Hate that. So, pro tip for me, go on Board Game Geek. Somebody has done reference aids for the witches. Print these out before your first game. Trust me, you will not regret it.
Barely an inconvenience.
The game includes an element of interaction with other players, with the idea that you can match with other players and discuss what you're going to do before you choose a card. There is an element of negotiation in play. Now, this works up to a point, and I do enjoy this aspect when it comes into play. You're thinking, you know, I could do with brewing some potions this turn. You know, anybody else fancy brewing right now? Anybody? No? You want a bit of brewing? You know, that's alright. It creates a little bit of banter around the table. The problem with this mechanic is that it does eventually wear out its welcome in the late game, where you don't really feel like you need to match with other players that much, but it really does depend on how the game goes. But at least this means that the game does not end up being a multiplayer solitaire game for the most part. You know, yeah, you're not necessarily influencing what people do on the map per se, apart from like, oh, I took the patient before you did. But you are essentially still having to think, well, what does somebody else want to do this turn? It's likely they might want to recruit. Well, maybe then I should think about recruiting. Would that benefit me? Can I convince them to recruit? You know, those little aspects when they do come into fruition are fun. It just means that this game, unlike, well, to be fair, a lot of other heavy Euro games, doesn't end up just being me putting my head down, sorting out my own little puzzle, and not caring what the other players do. I do welcome this mechanic. I just wish that it was more prevalent throughout the game, rather than just every now and again. The game comes with a solo mode, where you essentially go up against the Black Widow character. For reasons that we're going to get onto soon, this is actually probably the best way to play the game. The Black Widow solo mode is decent, not flawless. You know, it's not a lot of extra rules. It's only about 4 or 5 extra pages worth of rules that you need to absorb on top of the normal game. Most of it works similarly to how the multiplayer game works. It's just in this case you have these little spider miniatures, which even though it is spiders, I can actually stare at these without breaking into a cold sweat and freaking out, frankly. So arachnophobes shouldn't have to worry too much. But the idea with this is that these spiders, as well as the witch hunters, can sort of close in on you and make you lose points if they get too close to you. But what happens is that the Black Widow witch herself has her own deck of cards. They match yours, but they have different effects for the witch. You have a die, which with 2 of them face up and a deck face down, you roll the die, that's what card they use, and this is how they match with you or match with the Septima board. But you have a few negotiation cards at the start of the game which do various things like force the opponent to choose a card and cooperate with you, or, you know, roll the die before I get to pick my action so I know what you're likely to do. Little things like that. So you've got an element of semi-control over what the Black Widow does. You know, like, you know what, they could be doing a ritual this turn. Well, I mean, I wouldn't say no to a ritual at this point, but are they going to pick ritual? Hang on, let me just play my information card. Right, roll the die, and are you going to use ritual? You are. Okay. All right, you know what, I'm going to join you on the ritual front as well. And you know, that aspect does make the solo mode very interesting. Like a cool little way to, you know, replicate the multiplayer matching rule into the solo mode. But the solo mode is not flawless. We'll go on to some of those reasons in a little bit more detail later. But the main issue I did have with the solo mode is that there is an element of luck with the negotiation cards versus what the player does. Yeah, you can't necessarily fully predict what a normal player would do if they were trying to match with you. That makes sense, and it throws in that little bit of randomness. But what I wasn't a fan of is that some of these negotiation cards are definitely more powerful than others. You've got 3 of them. One of them lets you search through the deck, get the card you need, and use it as a matching thing. That's a brilliant card. It is always useful, okay? So that's your best one. Then you've got information. Roll the die before you choose your action card. Pretty useful. But then if they roll something you didn't want, it gives you the information, but you were kind of hoping they would roll what you want for this round. So you are still slightly at the mercy of what they do. Delay, though, is a waste of a card. It really isn't that great. It allows you to manipulate the row of cards that they have for what ones they choose. The problem is, you do this before you roll the die. So whatever you do with this manipulation, the die could still trigger it anyway. Okay, fine, I will swap the 2 cards around. It makes subtle difference to swap the cards around. I don't even know why it gives you it as an option. Okay, so instead I can decide I'm going to swap this card with the one off the top of the deck. Okay, great. Okay, that's fine. I didn't want that card to trigger this round. Okay, roll the die. Okay, roll the die. I'll just, yeah, here we go. Roll the die. Oh, I get a 3. Okay, that means I take the top card of the deck and trigger it. So the one that I just spent an entire one of my precious negotiation cards to trigger still triggered the card by luck of the die. So that was a waste of a negotiation card. And this element of randomness we're going to touch up in more detail later, but yeah, I didn't like the fact that, you know, you could try to do something against the solo bot and the die might just say, nah, screw it, it's not going to happen. And, you know, it makes the delay negotiation cards very weak in comparison to the others. One of the cards says you have to get rid of a negotiation card every time it triggers. Anytime they do that, I get rid of delay, because compared to the others, they're just frankly not as powerful. Now, there is a little bit of a blemish, but it's not, you know, it doesn't kill the solo mode. It's just one problem I had with it. But, you know, having to sort of manipulate your leader to try and get away from the spider pawns, you know, and also try to meet your objectives. And it's not beat your own score, but it's also not a AI score. The AI doesn't score victory points. What happens is you have these tribulations, as they call it, but basically they're objectives that you have to try and fulfill. And if you can fulfill at least 5 out of 8 of them, you win. There's no score in it. It's just, can you meet 5 out of 8 of the various objectives? And this can be, do all the 4 things on your divination card. But it could be like, right, have you got 4 witches? Has the AI got 3 or less witches? Do you have 42 victory points after you've taken off deductions at the end? You know, little things like that. So you can kind of tailor how you're going to beat the solo mode to an extent. Although, it's not the most difficult solo mode to beat. The first game I played of the solo mode, I did 7 out of 8 tribulations on my first playthrough. And that was after only playing the multiplayer game once. I've since played it more, but yeah, after one multiplayer game, I played the solo game once and I do 7 out of 8. That wasn't a difficult game, frankly. So you can tailor the difficulty to make it slightly harder. I think you're going to have to after you've played the solo mode once. And at that point, it did become much more of a challenge. You know, I sort of won half the time and lost the other half of the time. And that was kind of good. You know what? Solo modes don't get the difficulty scaling right these days. And I'm glad this one did. We got quite a few negatives to get through as per the timestamp. So yeah, let's make a start. Time length. Time length, oh my god. I hate it when publishers lie about the time length of games. Now, some of them are better at it than others. This is in a different league of taking the mick, because the time length on here says 25 minutes per player. I cannot even begin to describe how much of a complete lie that is.
Lies made baby Jesus cry.
That time limit is impossible to meet. It is impossible. I'm sorry, it's just impossible. No multiplayer game has kept to that time limit. This is definitely not including the setup and teach, which is a long setup. I mean, it's not the shortest game to, you know, set up and get everything ready and put stuff on the board, but then you've also got quite a front-loaded teach, so that means that you're gonna have to spend a long time teaching the game. But even if you knew the game ahead of time, 25 minutes a player is, at 4 players, that is an hour and 40 minutes. Most heavy Euro games cannot be played in an hour and 40 minutes, and I can tell you for sure this one doesn't either. You know, the first time we played, this game took over 2.5 hours. Even most other games after that, they still tend to take 2 hours plus, and part of the reason is because of the negotiation aspect with the cards. Every time you're discussing what you want to do with a card, thinking about your turn, maybe getting into the odd bit of AP, that uses up time, and this is just such a stringent, like, tight, restrictive line. But on top of that, 25 minutes a player. So this thinks it's gonna, you think you're gonna play this game in 25 minutes solo?
Are you freaking kidding me?
Seriously? 25 minutes? Most people don't play Cascadia in 25 minutes solo, okay? You know, that is a gateway game. You think I'm gonna play this in 25 minutes? I played it this morning, in fact, before I did the review, and that still took me a good 90. I mean, this is not a game. 25 minutes. You have 4 rounds with 5 phases. You have 20 actions that you have to do, decide, and resolve. So 25 minutes implies that you are going to spend, let's say you've got 5 minutes to take care of cleanup and admin and stuff like that. You're likely to be spending no more than a minute a turn. Good luck with that, and I wish you the very best of luck.
Good day, sir!
There's a lot of mechanics going on through the game, but they all sort of work up to a point, but they never fulfill their full potential. There's always some issue with every mechanic in the game. The map element, you have to move around this map a lot in order to get the ingredients you need, get to the patients you need to heal, utilize a couple of the buildings if they're in the game, and escape the witch hunters. But the problem is, there's so few ways you can move. You can do a quick step before your turn. It's only 1 space. It's not a massive deal. But there's only 1 of your 9 cards that lets you move, and it only lets you move 3 spaces unless you match, in which case it's a teleport. But assuming you don't match, that's basically 3 spaces of movement plus your quick step. And the map, as you can see from the pictures, is not the smallest map in the world. It's somewhat hard to get across it every now and again. And the witch hunters force you into the center, because if you go too close to the outside, if your suspicion is even halfway up your board, let alone any further than that, the witch hunter will just grab you instantly the second that you get a suspicion roll for it. So you don't want to go to the edge, so you end up having everybody cluster into the middle of the town, at which point the witch hunters just become redundant. You can easily just, this threat that you're supposed to have, chasing you all the time, is not so much a threat, it's more of a deterrent. It just stops people wanting to go to the outside of the board. They all cluster in the middle, which means that the patients that you're trying to heal just ends up being a turn 1, everybody heals, all the patients are gone for the round, and that's it. Now you've got to find something else to do. So there's some weird ways that the game progresses, and this happens on a frequent basis. But some mechanics here just straight up don't work. I don't like this ritual track. The ritual track there's no theme with it. All it is if you match with a player, if the icon on the card matches the ritual track, you'll level up 1 space, and the ritual card will let you level up a little bit further. All the ritual track is basically a track. That's it. You move up the track, and at certain points you might get a spell card, and you might be able to ready spells. Maybe get some points.
Whippy!
That's it. All that board, all this board here, that's like, not exactly a small affair. I mean, it's a pretty big board that you've got to somehow put like horizontal to everything because the spell cards are below the board. It's a weird way that they do it, but it's just a glorified track with nothing particularly interesting in it, and yet it's only in the full game. But I wouldn't necessarily take it out and only play the basic game, because then you're not really playing much of a game at that point. And then on top of that, the worst mechanic in this, the trial mechanic. That is a swingy bout of luck in a game that is a 2 to 3, potentially 3, but I mean, we're talking like a 2.5 hour, game of Euro heaviness here, right? And it throws in this trial mechanic, which is entirely luck.
If she weighs the same as a duck, she's made of wood.
And therefore,
a witch! A witch!
You put the meeples in the bag, you draw them out at random, majority person gets the witch, assuming that the witch doesn't get exiled. This, you can mitigate it to a point, like maybe put more of your meeples in there than another player, but it's still dumb luck. There's no other way you can mitigate this other than putting your people into the crowd. So basically, it's just luck. And in one game, I won 2 witches in a row, and I shouldn't have done. The first one, maybe I had a good chance for that one, but then somehow all my meeples got drawn out, the last remaining few in the second round, or second trial that happened, and I won the second witch. I didn't even want to win the second witch, but it meant that somebody who probably should have won it didn't, and it screwed them over because that was their ticket to another 10, 15, 20 points, and all because of blind luck they didn't get it, and they couldn't do anything about it. So why in a game which is a 2.5 hour affair do you throw in this complete random luck fest of a mechanic which is so swingy that it can flat out destroy a person's chance to win at a moment's notice?
Stupid!
It's stupid!
And you only get 4 of these trials in the game, so they are pretty, pretty impactful in terms of what happens, and they're your only main way of getting witches. Because you start off with 2, if you level up a patient track to the very top, you'll get another witch, but that's if you level it up to the very top, which is not the easiest thing to do anyway. So the only way to get other witches is to win them in the trials. But you've got space for 4. Most of the time in the game, you're only going to get, say, probably about tops 6 witches put on trial, 1 per round, and maybe a second one in 2 rounds. That tends to be the average. So 4 players, 6 witches on offer, and each of you is trying to vie for that many. You're not going to control many of these, and so you don't get to have a lot of those cool powers that the witches have. And even if you do win one, let's say I win one in round 3. Oh, she's got an ability which is meh. I might use it once before the game ends, but it's just basically a witch. So rather than having it for a cool power, you're just using it to do your Book of Divinations, which, yes, is how you score points, but that's not that interesting. You give me a stack full of stuff with cool special powers. I want to be able to use these powers. And some are definitely a lot more useful than others. The balance in here is not, even Steven, I can tell you that much. Some of these ones can be abused pretty heavily without too much trouble, and some of them are pretty situational or just not that impactful. So there's definitely some witches that get passed up a lot whenever they come out of the stack. Similarly to the map movement, where the map movement feels like just one too many steps to achieve what you need to do, the lunar cycle is also another one of those examples. On the board, you might not be able to see it here, it's basically where you move this marker across, and there's resources in between the moon marker as you go through the round. And one of your cards collects resources based on what is next to that lunar marker. But it's also based on what's printed on the board. So you have a situation where it's like, well, I will collect ingredients at some point, but then I also need to think, well, hang on, I want to collect it in 1 or 2 turns. So I've got to think, hang on, the moon marker is going to be there now, which means it's going to be those resources which are over there, or I go 1 round earlier, which means I need to go over there. Not only does this cause AP among players, but it's just another bit of faff. This is supposed to be a game that was designed to be more of an entry point into Mind Clash games, and yet they, despite having like a decent rule set, they just front load a bunch of these extra steps and extra things that you've got to do to achieve something. It's the same problem I had with Voidfall with the supply ships that you had. You had to do one action to get the ships from here to here on your board, and then you had to do another type of action to get them from here out onto the board. It was like, 2 steps to get to 1 result. Why can't it be 1 step to get to 1 result? And the same thing happens here. There's just there's a lot of little things that just get in the way of you ever having those turns that make you feel like, oh yeah, that was an awesome turn, that was a great turn, I had great fun with that one, or I did something really powerful then. Under no circumstances do I have any turn in this game where I go, that was a super turn, it gave me like, that I managed to achieve so much by doing that cool combo. And normally Mind Clash games is good for stuff like chaining actions and comboing stuff together. This doesn't let you combo really at all. I mean, you might have 1 or 2 spells that work in conjunction with your stuff, but other than that, there's not really a lot of combo potential here. Little graphical design issues pop up every now and again, like trying to find out all the little spaces in between the hexes that you can move your leader pawn onto. In a bad light, they're kind of hard to distinguish. One thing I really hate is that the hunters are split into zones on the map, but there's no clear line indication as to where the zones are. You have to basically look at those tiny little symbols and make certain that you've got, all right, that's the red one and that's the bronzy one. Okay, which one of those? All right, that's where the zone is. Why couldn't they have just segmented the board with like a clear kind of pie chart layout and just done it like that? It would have been a lot easier to follow. Now with the matching of the cards, I mentioned before that this is generally a good thing of the game, but it's also only works up to a point, because the game usually ends up being half, oh, I'll discuss what you're going to do, and there's no real incentive to lie, so you're basically just going, anybody fancy brewing? Yeah? No? Okay, well I guess no one's going to brew then, should I just do it anyway? Or you get somebody that goes, yeah, I think I'll recruit. Okay, cool, let's recruit. And both of you just do that. That's kind of like the level of banter it is. But then you get to a point in the game, usually about round 3 or 4, where nobody cares about doing it anymore. There's times where I'm like, I'm going to spend this whole last round doing these 5 actions. I couldn't care less if I match, and I don't want to get my suspicion any higher, so you know what? I don't want to match, so I'm just going to not say what I'm going to do. Yeah, fine, I'll just stay silent. And then you find that the game goes back into that quiet period where nobody's really chatting to each other about what's going on, and it's kind of like weird. The mechanic is good on paper, but doesn't always result in a game where there's a lot of interaction in a good way. You know, it feels like kind of like a gimmicky feature that doesn't work all the time. Like it sort of works, but occasionally it might just crash every now and again, and it makes for a bit of a sour experience. So Septima overall has just generally been a bit of a disappointment for me. I paid a lot of money to get the deluxe edition of this, and I just don't think it's met that quality that I would expect for that price. I mean, yeah, the components are decent, except for that stupid potion tray, but that's kind of the main good thing about the game, and probably the solo mode. The solo mode is actually half decent, and I would probably rather play the solo mode than the main game with multiplayer most of the time. But this game has a lot of little rules that sound good on paper or could work, but none of them ever really fulfill their full potential. I like the whole matching cards with other players, but that doesn't tend to be the forefront of the game for at least half of it. Okay, fine. Brewing potions and having witches with different special abilities, that sounds good on paper. But then when you try it, the potions are very limited, 3 of them are just generic spend to heal a patient, and the witches, even though they have like a cool ability each, you don't tend to end up with that many of them for enough of the game for them to be, you know, that much of an impactful part. But also, you know, I would have liked to maybe like had more, you know, juggling over the witches rather than just only having like the occasional opportunity that you can grab more. The whole trial mechanic, I mean, the theme of having a trial to see if the witch is going to escape in that is a pretty cool idea, but then it just turns out to be a luck fest with the bag, and it practically destroys a good chunk of the game having this mechanic in. I don't know how you would necessarily fix it, but I just think having something that is so swingy and yet so impactful on players' abilities to score points that, you know, to make it entirely luck-based in a game this long just beggars belief. And it is still a heavy game at the end of the day, which means even though I do like the rulebook and I think it's a very good quality one, you know, I think other publishers would probably take note of this, it's still a very front-loaded teach. You're not going to play this in a short space of time with new players. You've got to set the game up, which is already going to take a while. Then you've got to teach quite a lot of rules. It is a pretty big book at the end of the day. And then you've got to go through all the game, which is way longer than 25 minutes a player by every speck of the word, but then it could go on even longer depending on how talkative people are with the whole negotiation part. It just doesn't, it's too long for what it is, and what it has isn't compelling enough to make me want to play this over any of the other Mind Clash titles. Well, except maybe Astra, I don't know, I really didn't like that one, but I mean, compared to Carrion and Anachrony and all that lot, this thing doesn't even come close. And if you look on BGG, it's ranked 1500 plus. I'm not the only person who's fought this. There's a lot of people who have bought this and got quite disappointed with it. Really, the game is propped up mainly by its solo mode. But I wouldn't want to go through all this setup and the time length and everything to play this solo when I could play other games solo that are better anyway.
And I killed Sparky too.
This one for me gets a rating of a 4 out of 10. It's below average. In fact, I almost contemplated giving this a 3 out of 10, but the solo mode is enough to prop it up to a 4. It's easily, I think, the best way to play it. But everything else in here just doesn't live up to the potential. It could have been great. I liked the theme that this was going for. I was certainly down for having like a relatively meaty game from Mind Clash, but not as super complex as all the other stuff they've done. And it's lighter, yes, but it's not light enough. It's still heavy and front-loaded and has too many bits in it that it doesn't need. So nothing in here is necessarily terrible, except for the trial mechanic. That is terrible, and that potion tray. But nothing in here really comes off as great, or even that good really, apart from just a couple of little component bits and the solo mode. That's not enough to make this worth a purchase, especially not for the deluxe edition. It's one that I'm going to have to get rid of and see what I can do with it, but yeah, this was a bit of a disappointment. It could have been so much better. Maybe Mind Clash Games just needs to stick to their, you know, their typical norm. I mean, I give them props for trying to do something outside of their comfort zone, because more publishers need to do this. Sadly, this one just wasn't executed that well.
He's a fair cop.
So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. Don't forget to check out all the other content I've been doing, reviews, top 10s, live streams, the works. Let me know your thoughts on Septima. Are you one of the people out there who actually really loves this game? Because I know you exist, but I'm not hearing a lot from you at the moment, so by all means get your comments down below and let us know your reasons why you love this. But even if you hate the game, by all means get your comments down below. Do you agree with me, or do you have other things that I didn't mention that drive you nuts about this game? I'd be interested to know your thoughts. So take care, and remember, regardless of whether you're going to stand trial as a witch or not, it's still only a game, so I hope that you're not made of wood, and I'll see you next time.